Good morning all and welcome to the webinar COVID-19 Some Unanswered Questions organized by Medical Service Center. So we all know that coronavirus disease 2019 which first began in China is creating havoc all over the world. So a declared pandemic which is we do not know how many more months or days it is going to continue so, and even in India the scenario at the time of start of lockdown and now all these things, there are so many unanswered questions, and even for the health professionals we need to know a few things. So on all these aspects we need to have some more knowledge, and for that purpose MSc has organized this webinar today. And we have Dr. Subhash Babu, who is Associate Professor of Community Medicine in Mandya Institute of Medical Sciences. So he will be the speaker for the webinar today, and I welcome Dr. Subhash Babu sir, who is already here. At the beginning, we all need to have, there are some instructions for every one of us that we should keep our videos and microphones especially in mute, so that the session will be hassle free. And the session will begin with a small talk by Dr. Subhash Babu sir, and after that question and answer will follow. So this entire session will be moderated by Dr. Vasudendra sir, who is State Secretary of Medical Service Center, and Dr. Maulya Raj, who is also a member of MSc. So in this question and answer sessions, we need to remember to keep the questions short and to the point, so that we can cover as many questions and yet complete the seminar within a time of 1 to 1.5 years. So now let us begin with introduction of the speaker, which will be done by Dr. Ila. Over to you, Ila.
Good morning all. This is Dr. Ila from MSc Davangere. I would like to take pleasure of introducing our speaker for the day, Dr. P. Subhash Babu, Associate Professor in Community Medicine from Mandya Institute of Medical Sciences. Sir has finished MBBS from WIMS Ballari and has finished MD Community Medicine from Bangalore Medical College and Research Institute. Moving on, Sir has also done DNB in Social and Preventive Medicine, PG Diploma in Medical Law and Ethics. He has also done MA in Economics. Sir has worked as Regional Officer and also Associate Professor in Mandya Institute of Medical Sciences. Now holds additional responsibility as Nodal Officer at RNTCP at Mandya Institute of Medical Sciences. Sir is also part of many projects, and he has completed a project which is coordinated by a World Bank funded Karnataka Health System Development Project, which conducted a study based on needs and assessment and baseline survey to assess the road safety situation in selected districts of Mandya, Karnataka. Sir has coordinated other projects related to rabies and vaccinations, named activity of human monoclonal antibody of rabies administered in conjunction with rabies vaccine for post-exposure prophylaxis in patients following potential rabies exposure. Also, another study with respect to rabies is to assess the safety and immunogenicity of SILS purified varicose rabies vaccine in patients with potential rabies exposure. Sir has many publications in national and international journals. To name some, Journal of Association for Prevention and Control of Rabies in India, Journal of Evolution of Medical and Dental Sciences, Indian Journal of Pathology and Oncology, and few of the international journals like Journal of Scientific Study, of Current Research and Review, of Medical and Public Health, and Journal of Advances in Medicine. Along with that, Sir has translated WHO published title called FAQs in Rabies into Kannada in collaboration with Dr. Harish BR and Dr. Mahendra BJ, and this has been acknowledged by World Health Organization. Welcome sir to today's question and answer session. Now I hand over further to moderators of the program.
It is indeed a pleasure to have Dr. Subhash Babu with us for this question and answer session. So the format, as I said earlier, it would be like question and answers. So initially, I request Dr. Suresh Babu to give a background note to initiate a discussion about this aspect of the many aspects of this current pandemic. After that, myself and Dr. Maularaj, who is a surgeon, will be moderating the question and answer sessions. So first of all, I request Dr. Subhash Babu to speak a few words about this pandemic so that can give some basis for our further discussions. Subhash?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah. Now you are audible. Yeah.
Okay. I thank Dr. Ila for that introduction. I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see Lakshman sir, because if I remember in 2000 I was an undergraduate there, and sir had delivered a talk on computers and technology for doctors, and today we are using the same as medical professionals, and it underlines the importance of technology for doctors. So I remember that talk still, sir, when you delivered it in the Department of Surgery. So thanks everyone for attending this webinar today. I would like to just make a few
opening comments.
At the outset, I would like to thank Medical Service Center, Karnataka chapter, to take this initiative to organize this webinar, and also then to call me in as a resource person to speak and put forth my views on this pandemic. But before I just begin my talk, I have a few disclaimers to make. So the views I express on this webinar is in a personal capacity as an academician and having worked in public health programs. So it may not be endorsed by my department, institution, or the government of Karnataka. Also, I've tried my best to gather information from official websites like that of World Health Organization, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and the government of Karnataka. So inadvertent errors may kindly be excused. Okay, as you all know, is it clear? Is my talk clear?
Yes, Sure.
Yeah, as on today, as per World Health Organization website, 216 countries have been affected by this pandemic of COVID-19, and 7.5 million confirmed cases have been reported, with around 4,23,000 deaths. In our own country, there are 3.2 lakh confirmed cases with 9,125 deaths. But the point of solace is we have recovery rates more than the infection rates. So everyone knows that, or most of you know that, the Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Delhi are reporting high number of cases as well as deaths. And in South India, again, Tamil Nadu is reporting high morbidity and mortality. And in Karnataka also, we have around 6,284 cases with 82 deaths reported till date. Again, recovery rates have been quite good in Karnataka with 3,648 cases recovered. So just a brief about this infection. In the middle of December 2019, there were several unexplained atypical pneumonia cases. The etiology was unknown. They were reported in the hospitals of Wuhan city in Hubei province of China. And this clustering of cases led to further investigation of the disease. It was found to be mostly a viral etiology originating from the live animal market of Wuhan, which was sealed on December 31st for disinfection for at least 48 hours. And on January 7th, they zeroed in on that it may be a novel coronavirus. And February 11th, they named it as SARS-CoV-2, that is Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2 virus by the International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses, because it closely resembled the coronavirus which led to the pandemic in 2003. And it was again renamed as the disease which was caused by this infection was called as COVID-19. because it was reported in December 2019. So with this background, probably we can set the ball rolling for question and answers, or if anyone else also wants to add regarding the background information, they can join in.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Subhash. It was like a brief introduction. Questions are open to the participants. They can put their points or they can raise their questions. Like for me, to start with, most of us in our lifetimes have not seen a pandemic or experienced a pandemic. So I think this is first time we're witnessing. And probably, I think, not probably, we know there were several pandemics before also. Like, how do you see this pandemic as different from previous pandemics, and how severe were they? A sort of historical background, if you can give, it can help us to understand better the present pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So basically, as you know, pandemics are large-scale epidemics which involve a continent or more than one country. So even previously there have been pandemics, but not of this magnitude. So what sets this pandemic apart from other pandemics previously reported, like it may be SARS, which was reported in 2003, and MERS epidemic, that is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome epidemic, which was a pandemic which was reported in 2012. But what sets this apart is it has been on a global level. So probably no country has been spared with this infection. So that is what sets this apart. And again, historically, there have been many pandemics like that of plague in the historical times and the Spanish flu. But there are two things which sets this apart. One is, as I've already told, most countries or all of the countries have been involved. There have been no countries which has been spared. And the other thing is what seemingly was a very innocuous or very mild virus seems to have turned bad and has been responsible for mortalities and severe infections. So that is what sets this apart, this infection apart, this pandemic apart.
Okay. Maularaj, or any other questions from the audience?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Subhash sir and Dr. Vasudendra sir, for informative, brief information on COVID-19. Without further ado, we'll move on to question and answer session.
Yeah, sure.
If anyone has question, they can raise their hands or they can put question in the chat box so that one by one we can take up. I think there is a question from Varsha. Yeah, Ilar question. Yeah, please ask. You can directly ask him.
Hello, Varsha.
So one more query. Do these questions get recorded? It would be nice if these questions get recorded.
Yeah, we are recording.
Okay, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Varsha.
I think Dr. Subhash.
Hello, sir. This is Varsha.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes. Yes,
So
Varsha.
my question is, has community spread started in our country since we are having a greater than 10,000 cases in a span of 24 hours? So if it is a yes, then how can we, as citizens, protect ourselves from the...
Yeah, I got your question, Ms. Varsha. Dr. Mauliraj, would you like to answer, or I'll just begin this answer?
That is my question right now.
Yeah,
Subhash, you can answer.
Yeah.
Sir, you can answer, sir.
Yeah, from an epidemiological perspective, so when do we call it as community spread? So community spread is when you cannot link any particular case to another case. So basically, initially, when the pandemic started in our country, most of the cases could be linked to either international travelers or a community gathering. But what we are seeing currently is many cases cannot be linked epidemiologically to another case. So this is an indirect indication that there can be a community spread, but though officially it has not been acknowledged, because because it also induces a sense of panic in the people. Okay, so there can be low levels of community transmission which is happening. So there may be low levels of community transmission which is happening, but we don't have evidence for that. The only indirect evidence is when you cannot link the particular case to another case is when you say community transmission is happening. And many public health experts like Dr. Jaiprakash Muliyil sir and also Dr. Jacob John sir have acknowledged that there is community transmission. So that answers the first question. So what preventive measures? So at this point of time, we need to do more than preventive measures actually. So the preventive measures, as you all know, distancing measures, physical distancing measures, I wouldn't say it is social distancing. It is physical distancing because we cannot be isolated socially as human beings. So physical distancing and then hand hygiene measures, wearing a clean mask every time we venture out, especially with in public gatherings. And then, so this is the simple preventive measures, but we need to do more than that. So we need to be prepared to handle any mild cases at household levels. So that is one thing. The other thing is we need to reverse quarantine. They say this is something called reverse quarantine. The elderly people and the vulnerable people, like people who have comorbidities. Like yesterday we saw that a young male succumbing to COVID infection who was known to be a diabetic. So a 23 or 25-year-old male who succumbed to diabetic, it is reported that he was a diabetic as well. So as we know that people with comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, and also hypothyroidism, malignancies, and with an incapacitated immune system, so they are more prone to infections. So they need to be protected from the infection. So as of now, it is like we need to reverse quarantine them. That is one of the additional preventive measures. And also we need to have, if possible, if you have a separate room, an isolation room, we need to have that clean with minimal furniture, so that in case anyone gets infected, they have time to recover from infection. So these are the simple preventive measures that we need to take up to gear up ourselves to prevent large scale infection.
Hello, Varsha.
Hello, sir.
I hope you got your answer.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, sir. Not as of now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Varsha.
Okay, we'll move on to next question. Bale Bail asks a question.
So can you elaborate
Bale
on
Bail,
what
are
is
you there?
HP? Best preventive measures for HP.
Health professionals.
Health professionals. Okay, sir. Yeah.
For us, for all of us who are working in a hospital.
Yeah, thank you for that question, sir. So for health professionals, it depends upon the kind of risk that we are in. So the Government of India, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has given certain guidelines for this, and it is quite stringent for dental professionals. So I will start with other health professionals before I go into dental professionals. People who are working in OPDs, outpatient departments. So before you actually see a patient, you need to screen all patients for any febrile illness. So before you actually seeing any patient for even non-febrile illnesses like chronic illness like diabetes, hypertension, the first thing, or even ophthalmological practice or ENT practice or any other non-medical practice, I would say physician, a general physician. Okay. So we need to, first thing we need to ask is any febrile illness as well as travel history or having been into a community gatherings. Okay, like it can be for function or it can be large scale people gathering. So the first thing that needs to be done from a health professional perspective, the thing is you need to screen, and you need to have a triage area in an OPD setting before you actually start seeing patients. So that is the first thing, that's the operational measure in preventing thing. And you need to have documentation. So who all have visited your facility, so that it becomes easier for contact tracing in case any of them turn out to be positive later on. So those are the very basic things that you need to follow even before you start seeing a case. Next thing is, depending upon the risk that you have, it can be OPD, doctors would be better off using an N95 mask in healthcare setting, and ensure that all patients who visit the healthcare facility be wearing a mask. So it is ideal to have a triple layer surgical mask, and ensure that when they enter, as you all know, you would be already following this. When they enter the healthcare facility, they need to have their hands, hand hygiene measures, wear a mask. So that is one thing. And those who are actually seeing patients in inpatient settings, again, anyway, you would not be admitting any patient with ILI symptoms or SARI symptoms as of now if you are not designated as a COVID hospital. But if any individual who would get, who you think has ILI related symptoms, it is always better to get them tested for COVID. So initial operational measures, then screening measures and preventive measures like hand hygiene, wearing a surgical triple layer mask, and healthcare providers need to wear a face shield as well as a N95 mask. So that needs to be frequently changed. So N95 masks need to be changed every day. And if you're wearing a triple layer mask, it needs to be changed every 6 to 8 hours. And also you need to ensure that people attending the healthcare facility, they're wearing fresh masks, new masks, because we tend to see people who are reusing those masks day in and day out. So that is one thing that we need to ensure. People need to be trained on proper usage of triple layer masks. And in case of surgical settings, I would request the surgeons, especially Lakshman sir and Dr. Mauli Raj, if they can pitch in, like the kind of PPE. They would require a full PPE, but elaborate measures would be required. It also depends upon the engineering measures in the OT, operational theater as well. So because in a SARI hospital, they are suggesting that it is better to use emphasize on natural ventilation than mechanical ventilation entirely. But both things, what WHO suggests currently is it should be a mixture of natural ventilation as well as mechanical ventilation in operational theater settings. But anything, if they would like to add, or if they would add, it would be very nice from their point of view, from a surgeon's perspective.
Lakshman sir, can you add anything?
I can only say what we have been using at a practical level. Everybody coming into, we are running outpatients as usual, and we're doing cold cases for the last 3 weeks. Before that, at the height of the lockdown, we were dealing only with acute emergencies, and we were avoiding surgery as much as possible. That went on for 2 months. They get screened for temperature before they enter the hospital. They get a hand hygiene with an alcohol chlorethylene based rub. Only the patient is allowed. We do not allow attendees to come. And only if we need to communicate something, we then give the same precaution to them and then get them in. But otherwise, we don't allow patients' attendants to come, because we want to have physical distancing. And we don't allow too many people inside. It's a relatively small hospital, so we make sure that they are distanced at least 3 to 4 feet. Recommended is 6 feet, but it's too difficult to practice that. And in the outpatients, we use PPEs are of different levels. There are 3 stages, but we have reduced it for simplicity to 2 stages. In the outpatients and wherever else we walk around in the hospital, when we walk into the hospital, we're not in our street clothes. We change to our OT scrubs. We change to our usual OT scrubs and then come down and wear a gown, wear an N95 mask, a cap, and a face shield. This is a basic minimum when we deal with patients, because the philosophy is that you take that everybody is positive until proved otherwise. And so we do our examination, run the outpatients and all that. And once we are going into the operation theater, we go up the separate set for the operation theater. We discard everything in the outpatients, go up again, change to a fresh set of scrubs. And in addition to what we follow in the outpatients, we have a plastic apron underneath our gown. And we are getting COVID tests for all the patients on whom we operate. Initially, the government said no, but they seem to have relaxed it in the last 1 week or 10 days. We know that they are COVID negative based on RT-PCR, not antibody test, because antibodies are 50 to 60%, 50% false negative. Even RT-PCR is about 20% false negative, but we tend to believe that at least to that extent. So if we know that the patient is COVID negative, we don't do any more than this PPA other than the plastic apron. If we know that the they're COVID positive, we don't operate unless it's a life-threatening surgical condition. And if it's an unknown status where we can't get the test results for some reason, or we can't wait the 12 hours that we have to, then we use a full PPE, which includes a hood and everything else. But I can tell you, I've used it on 3 occasions so far, and it is almost impossible to operate. It's very uncomfortable, and the thing and the hood sort of gets the moisture clouds your view, and it is really very, very difficult to operate. And one simple thing we don't have any special ventilation or outside ventilation, but we have the minimum required air changes in our operation theater. It's a controlled environment in our theater. So we have, I can't remember the exact number, but we have several air changes per minute, so that there is a good circulation. In laparoscopy, it is important that aerosolization can occur, and so we don't let the gas out like we used to pre-COVID days. We specifically suck the gas out if we want to, there is any smoke inside. Earlier we used to just let it out into the operation theater air and it would get sucked out, but we don't do that anymore. We actually use a suction to suck the fume out and then let fresh carbon dioxide in. That is the basic thing that we're following now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Mauli Raj? I think you need to unmute Dr. Mauli Raj.
Unmute, please, Mauli Raj. Unmute, please.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yeah, even in our OTs also, as Dr. Lakshman sir told, same thing we are following. Like in OPD, one set of gowns with PPE means, as he said, like not entire PPE. Basically, we have to cover, use N95 mask, gowns, sterile gowns, and work in OPDs, and again change over to OT gowns later. So basically, and OT traffic in hospital, that has to be maintained. We need to train our staff. That is, I think, very crucial, very important. Train our receptionists, ayas, nursing staff, how to maintain distances. We have given face shields for all those who are, basically we grade the risks, and accordingly we provide PPEs.
Yes, sir. A detailed guideline on preventive measures for health professionals can actually be taken from the website of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So if we move on to the next question, did lockdown slow down the COVID trajectory? Can we move on to the next question?
Yes, Subhash, I think these questions are appearing on the chat box.
Yes, sir.
You can also look into. I think Dr. Maularaja has messaged that his network seems to be a bit unstable. So he'll be doing, and he can also take up questions.
Okay, sir. So the next question was, did lockdown slow down the COVID trajectory? Yeah, it appears so that the lockdown actually was quite effective, but we need to look at the two things here. When we look at the data, actually, the number of cases which were reported during the lockdown measures was quite less comparatively at different stages of the lockdown. So as you know that the lockdown 1, when we were in lockdown 1, which was announced in March 24th to April 14th, the number of cases was far lesser. And subsequently, with each lockdown being relaxed, we are seeing more number of cases being reported. So we need to take it with a pinch of salt, because it appears that it has actually slowed down. But if you look at the number of tests which were performed during that lockdown period, it is not the same number of tests which are being done now as on today, because today we have at least 11 to 12,000 tests which are done on a daily basis throughout the country. But at that point of time, we didn't have so many number of tests, or the number of laboratories were not quite high. But with the number of cases, we can surely say it had worked. Lockdown has worked because it restricted movement of people, which included the number of the people who were infected. But probably we needed to have a better system of easing that lockdown, because whenever lockdown was announced or easing of lockdown was announced, it led to more number of people congregating or people traveling. So that is one of the factor which has facilitated transmission also. So I would say, to a certain extent, it has slowed down the COVID trajectory. The lockdown measures had slowed down, but the unlocking or the easing of lockdown measures probably, to a certain extent, has also facilitated the transmission.
You mean to
Okay.
say unlockdown has facilitated its transmission?
Yes, sir. I mean, the way it was actually done, the unlocking, because this is a large-scale migration. As you saw, there is a large-scale migration of people from different states to their home states, and the starting of the transport facilities was also not as anticipated, which was required. So some things have facilitated. Some things have facilitated, because as the infection itself, it is what facilitates transmission is large-scale public gathering, large-scale travel. So all these things are facilitators for this transmission of this kind of infection. So whenever it has been eased, there are factors which have facilitated transmission. I wouldn't say entirely responsible, but it has played its role. Hello?
Hello. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Seema has sent one question.
Okay, sir. Yeah, is the COVID-19 virus really mutating to be stronger and more dangerous? So I would like to recall when actually the China government of China or the Republic of China released the antigenic structure of the virus. It was within 7 days. Probably that was one thing that needs to be appreciated, because for all the wrong reasons, it has become famous now. It has been known as China virus and all. Apart from that, the antigenic structure of the virus was released by China within around 7 to 10 days. So December 31st, they sealed down the Wuhan market. By January 7th, the entire antigenic structure of the virus was released by the Chinese government for utilization for diagnostic tests, for developing diagnostic tests. And it was quite similar to the earlier SARS virus in 2003. So even ICMR has taken up studies to study whether there is a significant mutation altering the nature of the virus. But even ICMR has not confirmed that there are different viruses circulating. So as on today, initially also AIIMS, All India Institute of Medical Science, also said that there are two kinds of viruses. One is a more virulent virus, but the NIMHANS virologists have said that it is the same virus which initially began the international spread. So as on today, there is no scientific evidence to say that there are different viral serotypes which are circulating. So because we don't see much of, there is some skepticism, there is still fear as to even the involvement of research, isn't it? So because you need to be prepared to do even research on it, may be the patient or even the virus for that matter. So as on today, there is no scientific evidence to say that the viruses are different.
Okay, so you meant to say it's the same virus?
It is the same virus. It is the same virus.
Basically, the difference is in the host.
Yeah,
That's causing more.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So we'll move on to next question.
Yeah, Mr. Sendil has asked whether our public are aware about usage of masks. Either the cloth mask is beneficial. Okay, as per the Government of India guidelines, for public usage in a general public place, they suggest even a cloth mask is beneficial, because it is to ensure that a symptomatic individual does not bring out the droplets out into the environment to make others susceptible. So even a cloth mask is beneficial provided it is clean. It is cleaned every day. It is dried under the sun and disinfected. So even a cloth mask is beneficial. But as you can see, not everyone is aware about the importance of mask. Probably because as was mentioned, just like for a health professional, using an entire PPE is so discomforting. The same way, people are not used to wearing masks in routine public interaction. So over a period of time, they tend to just neglect the usage, and they feel that it may not be beneficial. But it is to be constantly promoted that people need to use it. And you can see the way they use it, it is not proper. Many a time they don't cover their nose properly, and the masks are not entirely covering their face. Ideally, the mask should cover the nose as well as it should cover their chin, apart from their mouth. So the public need to be constantly made aware of how to use masks, what kind of masks they need to use, how frequently it needs to be changed, and whenever it gets wet, it needs to be immediately discarded. And how it should be discarded is also important, because many a time we see in public places or on roads, you see a lot of masks scattered here and there. It is not just from a public perspective, even healthcare professionals tend to do that. We've seen that masks are discarded very indiscriminately. So even these things, apart from wearing a clean mask, proper usage of mask, it is also important to dispose the mask properly.
Okay, Dr. Subhash, like, yeah, Subhash,
Yes, sir.
you recommend masks for everyone who is going outside or who is entering a public sphere. So you recommend mask for everyone.
Yeah, I would say if they are in crowded places, it is always better to wear a mask, sir.
Okay.
In a crowded place. But
Yeah,
actually, the government says,
yeah, please. Tell
yeah.
me.
Actually, when you are wearing a two-wheeler, see, we have insisting on. I've been insisting on this in many police awareness programs that I do, because when you are riding a two-wheeler, it is not necessary that you use a mask, because you are not exposing anyone else for your droplet infection, nor you are get infected because of the airflow. But if it is for environmental pollution, you can use a mask. But people are being fined because of not using a mask, especially two-wheeler riders. But one is from a legal perspective, you need to adhere to law. They need to wear a mask. But especially in a crowded area, they need to wear masks. So that would be ideal.
Okay, as Dr. Lakshman said, it's basically to prevent spread from person who may be harboring an infection. Yeah,
right.
That's
who may be harboring an infection. Yes.
And moving on to next question.
What is herd immunity actually?
Okay.
Is this of any use in preventing the spread? Okay, so herd immunity, from a textbook perspective, it is the immunity that is offered beyond what is individual immunity. What is beyond what immunity is offered for the individual. Basically, it may be through infection, either through the natural way or via vaccination. So that is what is meant by herd immunity. So just to simplify things, if there is a community which is infected to the extent of 60 to 65%, an uninfected individual will be surrounded by individuals who are immune to, so that individual gets protected from the infection by virtue of being surrounded by immune individuals. So that is what is meant by herd immunity. See, especially in an infection like this, which is a new infection where not many people would have been exposed to this infection, ideally everyone should be infected to get some sort of herd immunity. But what public health experts say is, at least for herd immunity to be good or to provide some sort of protection, there should be at least 55 to 60% of people who should be infected with this virus. So we can expect that by November, what JP sir, Dr. Jaiprakash Mudail, he's from Christian Medical College, what he has predicted is by November at least 50% of our country's population will get infected, or at least 50 to 55%. So this is a huge number. That is 132. That is 1.32 billion population. At least 6.6 billion of them will get infected. That means every next house or every there would be an individual who would be infected with this virus in every household, for that matter. So we need to prepare ourselves for that. So every time in a war, this is basically a war. In any war, we always need to prepare ourselves for the worst rather than the best scenario. So that is what is meant by herd immunity. That is the immunity offered beyond what is offered for the individual immunity. And it is significantly, I mean, as of now, we don't have any other option. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have any antiviral drug which is active against this virus. So the only, I would say, it is not a hope. We don't have any other way. So we can just anticipate herd immunity is going to protect us from this infection. Okay, I hope that answers this question from Ms. Nayana. So moving on to the next question. Are the governmental measures sufficient in this phase 3 of the pandemic? So how far the lockdowns have helped? What else need to be done? So actually regarding the lockdown, I've already talked. See, we need to go back to the basics actually, whether the governmental measures are sufficient in phase 3 of the pandemic. As you know that healthcare expenditure or healthcare allocation, budgetary allocation for healthcare have been quite low since our Independence Day. It is not very different even in this few years, which has not exceeded more than 2% of our total budgetary allocation or GDP. So with this kind of investment happening over healthcare, it is not quite enough, because as of now we don't have any new hospitals having been built to accommodate or to address the healthcare needs of COVID patients. So most of the earlier government hospitals have been converted into COVID hospitals. So people have been subjected to hardships because people who are coming for other ailments, they will not be able to come to COVID hospitals for their other ailments. So in that way, there have been certain drawbacks, but it was quite inevitable. As you all know that they had to address this pandemic. They had to separate, isolate these patients from other disease patients. So that was the government measures, which was quite inevitable. Regarding the lockdowns, I've already talked. So what else needs to be done? Again, many countries have displayed this. It can be Dubai, or it can Saudi Arabia or UAE or China or even France. So we need to have dedicated hospitals. We need to have separate hospitals built for COVID patients. So as of now, we have a semblance, or we have an average number of patients who would be requiring hospital care. So we need to go for household isolation of cases. So not quarantine. Please remember, it is isolation of cases. If there is a facility at households, or if there is, based on the assessment of the individual households, probably individuals can be isolated in their households, mild or asymptomatic individuals can be isolated at homes, and probably dedicated COVID hospitals need to be built, at least to address this, tide over this crisis. So that's what I feel. So anyone wants to add to that? This question: are the governmental measures sufficient in this phase 3 of the pandemic, and what else needs to be done? Anyone wants to add to that?
Dr. Sudhakar, yeah. Anyone else? Like, so far, what measures have been taken, whether they are enough, or in hindsight, could it have been better? Or what are our suggestions for further prevention? So if anyone has a point to make, they can make. So basically, Dr. Subhash, you are saying, like, because of lack of sufficient public health system in place, what could have been done could not be done.
Yes, sir. I mean, there are differences in states also. We don't have a uniform public health system throughout our country, and health being a state subject, so it is up to the states to develop their healthcare systems. So every state has its own healthcare system, though it is a common 3-tiered structure of primary healthcare system that we see. but the expenditure and the way it has been developed, it is different in different states.
But on the whole, it is.
Yeah, as Medical Service Center has been repeatedly emphasizing that more expenditure needs to be put on healthcare.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the situations. Probably this is someone has rightly said. It's basically it has exposed the system.
Yeah. Yes, sir. It has not broken the system. It has exposed the
pathetic system what we are having. Of course, as a public health expert, I have your views. But from our organizations, we have been telling like public health system needs to be strengthened. Preventive primary care has to be emphasized.
Yes, sir.
And we thank Dr. Lakshman, who has another some commitment. He has to leave this discussion. We thank him for attending and giving his valuable inputs regarding particularly health providers' protection.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
Dr. Subhas.
Yes, sir.
I'm having a particular question regarding this lockdown.
Yeah, this is.
I heard that. Hello.
Yeah, Dr. Rajshekar, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Regarding this lockdown, I heard that lockdown should be a last weapon. But in India, in the initial stage, lockdown was imposed. Is it true?
No, sir. I think it may not be a last weapon.
Yeah.
Because at some point of time you will have to impose lockdown measures, containment measures.
Okay.
And this has been in line with what WHO has also been suggesting, because India was not the only country which was in lockdown during what was announced.
Okay.
Other countries were also in lockdown, like Thailand was also in lockdown during the same period. China was also in lockdown, and different countries were in different phases of lockdown. Actually, India was not the only country, and it may not be the last measure. Actually, it definitely is not the last measure to contain the spread, because it is part of the containment measure. So we are quite okay on the track of lockdown measures. But yes, sir.
One point I wanted to make, like lockdown of entire country or particular areas which are supposed to have infection geographically. You mean to say like China lockdown entire country or a particular area of country or particular region or particular district? What we call micromanagement could have been better than locking down entire country.
Yeah, ours is
you meant same. Lockdown means lockdown of entire country or lockdown of particular areas?
Yeah, actually, from an administrative perspective, sir, I don't know to what extent I may be right, because as you know that when lockdown was initiated or was put forth, we also had the National Disaster Management Act. NDMA was put into act. So before actually lockdown was announced. So without NDMA being in place, it could not have been put into action. Lockdown could not have been put into action. And with NDMA, there will be a lot of restrictions for public. So because if it was in some areas, if it was selectively in some areas, probably there would be chances of people going for court, or so it has to be uniformly implemented. It had to be uniformly implemented. So probably that is one thing that they had to implement throughout the country. So I would say it is quite okay with that. But we didn't have the data also. At that point of time, we didn't have the data as to what was the rate of infection in different parts of the country. So probably we can say international travelers were mostly coming to Delhi, Mumbai, and then Bangalore. But we couldn't have selectively imposed lockdown. The government could not have selectively imposed lockdown without NDMA being in place.
Okay. Yeah, now I think Dr. Sudha, our president, she wanted to add few things. I request her to add few things. On Senthil has been putting questions. There are a few other questions, so we have to speed up.
Hello? Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
madam. Please go ahead.
I just had a point because global health emergency was declared by WHO
Yes, madam.
on January 30th itself, and
Yes,
pandemic
madam.
was declared by March 11th. Our government took measures very late. I feel had they sent for quarantine all those who came from abroad, that measure probably would have prevented this spread. So there was delay, and they were in a denial mode. They did not accept that it is affecting us. So there was delay. Not only here, even in America, the same problem. So China took measures to control it fast, though it did not bother to control it from spreading outside. Its own country took measures. It has taken better cognizance of the measures, I feel. That is one point I wanted to make. Another thing is getting ready all this PPE and other things for the health professionals who are exposed to it. I think there was a delay and there was inadequate supply, and many of the health professionals are infected and many deaths have also occurred. I think on these two counts, government has really taken, not taken proper measures, is my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, madam. I would request people to stop typing in questions. Probably we can just go ahead after we address all the remaining questions.
Yeah.
So
you can take up next question, Subhash.
yeah, actually, as what madam has pointed out, you can see that there would be conflicting views again, because we initially thought that in the previous question we saw that lockdown should have been the last resort, and again madam was of the view that we should have acted earlier. Lockdown should have been initiated earlier itself. Actually, if you just look at the Government of India website, there have been travel advisories which have been issued from February itself. Actually, the very recent one, the most earlier one was probably in 5th February, because when the first alerts, WHO alerts were issued, if you can look at the WHO alert situation reports, it started in January 21st. The first situation report came in January 21st. It did not mention coronavirus. It did not mention SARS-CoV-2. It did not mention COVID-19, actually. So they said that there are unexplained virological pneumonia cases being reported in China. So you need to be alert regarding that. And probably if Government of India had acted very early, it would have induced a sense of panic in all people, and there would be a rush from all corners of the world. People would rush back to our country, and that could have led to more chaos. So retrospectively, I'm just contemplating on that. So we couldn't say how people would have predicted. See, the virus, we can say that how virus predicts it, how virus reacts can be predictable, but how people react is entirely unpredictable to this global pandemic. So that is what has actually facilitated or facilitating transmission as of now. And also, I listened to madam's talk on PPE for health professionals. Yeah, initially we were not ramped up to produce PPEs on such large scales. So not many suppliers were there. As on today, there are at least 550 registered individual companies which are supplying for PPEs. So we don't know to what extent this. See, basically it is economics, as you all know. There is a demand-supply ratio which is actually driving PPE. Earlier there was not much demand, so there were not many manufacturers who were supplying PPE. It was very less in demand, less in supply, and the quality was also quite questionable. But now the government has set standards, and also there are, I don't know the full form, there is an SITRAP guidelines for the standards of PPE, and the suppliers need to adhere to this guidelines, and also WHO guidelines. Again, but if you have a full PPE, as sir mentioned, it can be very difficult to function as a surgeon, as a physician in delivering healthcare.
Okay, Dr. Subhash, I think we have to speed up. Like many questions are coming.
Yeah. Next is China could prevent the spread of virus beyond the Wuhan province by war-footing measures. Actually, sir, yesterday Beijing started reporting cases. So the virus is not so easy to contain. initially people were very skeptical that China was entirely limiting information. It was not sharing information properly. Their containment measures were good actually initially, but it is not a virus which can be contained, as you all know. Even within China, there is a lot of spread. Beijing has started reporting infection. There is probably a second wave of infection in China, or probably it is just a continuation of the same wave of a pandemic. So next one is, what is your opinion on repeatedly changing WHO guidelines, and would you like to follow it? I mean, we need to use our logic, and we need to use our scientific knowledge, whether to what extent we should be following, because the guidelines are uniform guidelines for every country, but based on our country realities, we need to modify. So I would say it would always be better to limit to MOHFW guidelines, because they would be framing those guidelines based on WHO guidelines, based on the realities of our country. So even with our own country website, we have a lot of guidelines, but whichever guideline is relevant to us, we should be using. So it would be better if we follow those guidelines, depending upon what kind of health professional that we are, and is it whether it is in public sphere, or is it for public to use, or for the health professionals to use. Okay.
Next question.
Okay, sir has expressed his views on mask. Mr. Vishal Dotmani is asking a question on, there are a lot of questions on confusions and conflicting reports surrounding HCQ. What is its efficacy in treatment of COVID-19? Okay, very important question. See, initially there was a WHO recommended using HCQ. CDC also recommended using HCQ. And there is a lot of information coming on HCQ and confusing us whether to use HCQ or not. Even I was a little confused. I have not taken HCQ prophylaxis till now. But as you can see, yesterday or day before yesterday, there was a publication which was retracted from New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet. But the gist is, HCQ is protective. Basically, hydroxychloroquine is protective. The prophylaxis is protective. But you need to use it very judiciously, especially people with cardiac conductive disorders. You need to be very careful. And people with any retinal problems, you need to be very careful. And G6PD deficiency, you need to be very careful. So with that gist, HCQ is quite productive. I have a strip with me, and probably I am contemplating using HCQ if the need arises. Only thing is, it just exposed the pharma lobby in influencing physicians' decisions, because the two authors who have been implicated in the withdrawal of that article actually said that HCQ prophylaxis may not be beneficial. So HCQ, as you know, it's a very affordable drug, which there is no mechanism of action which has been explained, but it is mostly used as an immunomodulator in rheumatoid arthritis. But it alters our immune mechanism to fight SARS-CoV-2 or the viral infection. So HCQ to a certain extent is protective, is what researchers are saying, especially from a French. You can just Google the details on that, but the gist is it is protective. Okay, shall we move to the next question?
Yeah. And I think
the next is on case fatality. So as you can see from different country reports, Italy or Spain and China, the fatality has been, especially in Italy and European countries, the case fatality has been around 8 to 9% among the case to the number of cases reported. And again, even in our own states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, the case fatality has been hovering around 8 to 9%. But there are few states which have done well, like our own state of Karnataka, and then Kerala, and especially northeastern states. For unexplained reasons, there have not been much cases. Manipur, Tripura, they are not reporting much cases. Probably it is not that not many people, international travelers, have arrived there. That may be one of the reasons. Case fatality rates have been quite stable, and probably it will be the same as the pandemic evolves in our own country also. But the statewide differences will remain depending upon the healthcare scenario that is there already.
No, her question is, her question is like, because fatality rates are so variable and different, can we bank upon herd immunity? And
Okay. Yeah, it is not. You see, herd immunity as a policy, it is not advisable to promote herd immunity or people getting infected, not using any precautionary measures. It is always better to use those preventive measures which are recommended by government, like using masks, hand hygiene, and physical distancing. So, not entirely promoting herd immunity, like promoting public gathering without these preventive measures. So, that would not be a good idea. So, always better to avoid getting infected using these preventive measures.
Okay.
So, developing herd immunity, what is my understanding is, you would be promoting public, you would not impose any restrictions on people. Just let them move about the way they are as of now. Opening up malls, opening up swimming pools, opening up hotels and restaurants without any preventive measures. That is not the kind of measures that you would advocate in this pandemic. So, it is always better that you restrict the people getting infected, and probably in this way we are getting exposed to low levels of viral loads. So probably that is just a probability that I am making. So it is not advisable. Okay, the other thing is, nowadays we get lots of forwarded messages regarding how we can prevent COVID-19, like drinking hot water, taking lemon, having ginger. Yeah, I would say any infection for that matter, you're reducing your exposure to antigens. If you're drinking boiled and cooled water, you're reducing your exposure to antigens. And gargling, especially hot salt water gargling, again, it reduces your exposure to antigens. That's the only logical way of explaining things. But the other interventions like taking lemon, ginger, probably their flavonoids or vitamins may or may not help us. I wouldn't say it has a protective effect, but it does not have a negative effect. So at least in that way, it is not having a negative effect. It is supplementing nutrients, micronutrients. So there is no harm in that. But don't try only those things, not addressing the other preventive measures. So I would suggest that. So you need to take all preventive measures, and drinking hot water is okay. Gargling with hot salt water is also okay. But nutrition, macronutrient and micronutrient intake should be good.
That means that should not replace a routine.
Yes, sir. So ideally, you should gargle every 2 times in a day, morning and night. I mean, especially before going to bed, it is always, even dentists advise that even cleaning your teeth, brushing your teeth before going to bed is also quite protective against any other viral infections, not just SARS-CoV-2. And also gargling, because most of the time our exposure to viruses is through the oropharynx and the tonsils. So those are the first lines of defense. So always better to gargle and go to sleep. Okay, so anything else? Since herd immunity was discussed, there are few articles which say reinfection is possible from coronavirus. So does primary infection reduce effects of secondary infection? Okay, so they say that, I mean, as of now, there are articles or case reports suggesting that reinfections have happened. Again, as you all know, coronavirus is a highly unstable virus. It's not entirely of a human, it's not a virus which entirely infects humans. It is also a virus which infects animals. So there will be some sort of modifications in the virus. I wouldn't say an alteration in its genomic sequence, but there would be some antigenic or epitope modifications which would help it to reinfect the same individual. So, but it would provide some sort of cross immunity, because any immunity to other coronaviruses also provides some sort of cross immunity to this SARS-CoV-2. but we have not been able to scientifically prove that. So theoretically, we can say that any infection, because this is the realm of evolutionary biologists. See, what I'm of the view, even from the starting of this pandemic, because coronaviruses have been there since time immemorial with humans and animals. So it would be the evolutionary biologists who will be able to identify, because we have genomic sequences of most of the viruses even in our own body. So that is what drives our immune system also. So some sort of antigenic modification will happen with repeated infections of coronavirus. And there would be theoretically some sort of cross immunity which develops to coronaviral infections. But it may not be entirely protective.
Yeah, Subhash, next question. You can sip some water.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm seeing you getting dried up. I think there is one question by Shashi Kumar. He is asking specifically to quantify exposure of an individual to the virus. How to quantify?
Okay.
Exposure of an individual to the virus. When and how is somebody said to have got exposed? Is there any way to quantify that exposure to the virus? And can young and able-bodied people be exposed in the open now under unlock?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question. Actually, when I was revisiting my textbook of microbiology, our undergraduate microbiology textbook, in introduction to virology, there is a very interesting sentence. The viruses interact with humans in 3 different levels. One is at the individual level, and at the community level, and at the immunological level. So that was quite interesting. Actually, if you go back to the textbook, actually it is very nice. That's a statement. By exposure of an individual to the virus, I don't know if we can quantify in terms of the viral load, but from a contact perspective, from a public health perspective, the guidelines say that if an individual is in contact, is in close range, that is within 1 meter of an infected individual or a suspected infected individual, without using any mask or any protective measure for at least 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, then you would be considering him or her as a primary contact. So they will be at a higher risk compared to other people who have been not exposed in this way. So any individual without using mask and having been in close contact within 1 meter range of a suspected infected individual, you would say that individual has been exposed. So any other kind of exposure would be a secondary contact from a public health perspective. So as of now, when we are identifying primary contacts and secondary contacts, we would be asking this history. So what was the kind of interaction? Say, for example, that's why healthcare professionals would be in the primary contact list rather than in the secondary contact. If you are providing healthcare and if we are not using any protective measure and within 1 meter, most of our interventions will have to happen with a distance of less than 1 meter many a times. So we would be categorized as primary contacts, and it definitely takes more than 15 minutes for patient and doctor interaction or patient nursing staff interaction. So that is a kind of exposure to a virus or to the droplet. So rather than the virus. So basically the droplets is what will be carrying the virus. So any individual getting exposed to more than 15 minutes to a suspected infected individual within a range of 1 meter. So that is what we would mean from a public health perspective as exposed. So can young able-bodied people, I wouldn't suggest that. So we shouldn't break those preventive measures. So exposure in the sense, we need to use masks. We need to maintain that distance. So we shouldn't be celebrating things. It is not something to be celebrated about. Unlocking is not something to be celebrated about, as we saw in the initial phases. So that is what we should be doing. We should not be doing those things.
Okay. Next is Senthil, our pharmacologist. He is asking, like, government is not utilizing medical resources properly. There are many specialists, including anesthetists, who are looking after administrative works.
Yeah. Okay. I think as Mr. Senthil is from ESI, I'm quite familiar with the scenario with ESI also, because I'm not entirely. Some anesthetists would already be in administrative position, so they might not be coming back into healthcare provider thing unless they're compelled to do so. So even our own medical superintendent is an anesthetist, but as of now we don't have SARI cases which require more of emergency management. So it would they probably would be coming back to patient management if the need arises. You would be seeing in most cases. I mean, there have been 82 deaths which have been reported in Karnataka, and most of them are, at least half of them would be SARI cases. So the initial management of SARI cases would be like they may need intubation, and once if they go into intubation, it is quite difficult to revive them, wean them off from ventilators. So if intubation may also be done by physicians, and subsequently managing them patients on ventilators will be up to the emergency medicine specialist or the anesthetist. Yeah, I would agree to what Mr. Senthil said. If there is a dearth of anesthetists in the patient management, but if anesthetists who are already into administration, they may not revert back to patient management at this scenario, because as of now there are adequate healthcare providers who are into hospital. The other way around is people avoiding duty. So there may be a possibility that people are avoiding duty because many of them who are in administrative thing, they may already cross 50 years. So as a government mandate, many of these elderly or elder anesthetists or elder physicians are being exempted from COVID duty. So that may also be the case. But we have seen in AIIMS and many other places where elderly doctors have died in the line of duty. So we see mixed kind of working. So all these kinds of scenario we see, but if specialists are avoiding duties, then it is something to be worried about from an individual perspective. But at many places we have anesthetists who are also been posted. And as you see that most of our frontline healthcare providers are mostly residents, because as of now, it is also saving on PP. It is also saving, as of now, most of them are asymptomatic individuals in our state. So as you can see, and especially I can talk about Mandya because all these people who have been admitted for a few, barring a few couple of people, patients who have been, one of them is in ICU, thankfully not on ventilator. So only then will anesthetists be required, or even physicians, senior physicians will be required. As of now, residents are managing. Hats off to them. Actually, the younger generation of doctors, they're really doing a very good job. And with the need, they're being supervised by our senior doctors also. There have been instances where doctors are not attending duty. That individual thing that needs to be addressed by the administrators.
Okay. Moving on to next question, like it is one of the most important questions, like why death rates in India compared to other Western countries, US and Europe, is less, though infection rate is so high. This is one of the questions which is being discussed among our medical circles. What is your view on that? One of our participants has asked that.
There are two reasons what I can think of, sir. Two reasons. One is, as I already said, lockdown to a certain extent has worked, and it has given us time to. So one is that lockdown to a certain extent has worked, and the other is, so the extension of the first reason itself. USA actually did not stringently implement lockdown. Even New York, with a high number of cases, was not into lockdown at all. So basically, New York, which reported the highest number of cases in America, they never went into lockdown, and now it has been contemplated. That is one thing. The other thing is we are probably 2 months behind the pandemic. Probably the pandemic is at least 1 to 2 months behind in our country, and probably touch wood, and I don't believe in God forbid, we will not have so many deaths in our country, but at least 1 to 1.5 months we are behind the pandemic. The pandemic is behind in our country compared to other countries. We need to be prepared more to handle severe cases. That is what I still feel. That is what even the public health experts feel. There is a need to ramp up public health hospitals, public hospitals, and even private, because what we are seeing right now, private hospitals, though they have been given the go ahead to handle COVID cases, it has driven up the healthcare costs too high. So even a rich person will not be able to afford this kind of healthcare costs for managing mild cases to even those requiring ventilators. So this is something that needs to be addressed from everyone, not just from the government, the private sector, the government sector, and collectively as a community we need to do this. So one is, answering the question that was put, probably we are still behind. The number of deaths, as you can see, it is gradually increasing, and we need to be careful about that.
There is two theories like BCG vaccination or malarial infection, or because there was one question, or could it be a genetic kind of reasons, temperature. So many theories initially they were being discussed. Is there
but
any?
That requires a lot of in-depth research. Actually, if you just look at the vaccination theory which was put forth, it was not entirely a patient-based scenario. It was based on data from individual data where countries which were following vaccination and which were not imposing BCG vaccination. So that kind of information will not provide us any kind of guidance as to whether a vaccination, because vaccination is still continuing in our country, and vaccination may not be entirely responsible, because this is entirely a different virus. Even I initially thought that vaccination for different viral infections, we have pentavalent vaccines, which includes vaccine for at least hepatitis B, pertussis, those viral infections. So there may be cross immunity, may or may not, but we cannot prove that we need to prove that by antibody titers. So, and that antibody titers, whether they are specific for these viral infections or does it provide even cross immunity to coronaviruses, that we don't have that evidence, that kind of scientific evidence. So until unless we have that kind of scientific evidence, we cannot say. It can only be a possibility. It is not. It would not be a fact.
Okay, I think almost all questions.
Yeah.
I think questions are over. If at all anyone wants to add something, Dr. Suresh, Dr. Ashekar.
One question actually we need to be concerned about is, sir, you had asked about why elderly and children are more vulnerable. So as such, elderly and children are more vulnerable to any new infections. But we need to be careful about pediatric infections henceforth, because Great Britain was reporting multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, and which is very similar to Kawasaki's disease. So that is one thing that our healthcare providers need to be always report any fever with rash to the concerned individuals, concerned patients. So please be on the lookout for the ILI symptoms in children also. So that will help us avoid mortality in children or severe admission rates in children.
So you mean to say school? Yeah, related question: schools to be opened or not is one of the questions raising parents' minds.
Yeah, they need to be opened in a staggered manner. So probably my suggestion would be 1/3 of them could come to schools, because provided they are trained. Because if you look at the our school culture, basically it doesn't train them to follow many of these preventive measures. So they need to be, every child should be trained in adopting these preventive measures. And schools, maybe if at all we open the schools, the government, if you open the schools, they need to be opened in staggered manner. Probably 1/3 of the children can come, 1/3 can attend the same class in a remote mode, in the web-based mode, and 1/3 can actually take off. I mean, they can just do some homeworks. Again, this can be done on a rotational basis over a long period of time, probably 6 months more, or probably towards the whole academic term, basically. because we need, otherwise this whole academic term will be a negative, will be a zero academic term. If at all the schools open, they shouldn't be opened in a very all children need not be admitted together. So they can be admitted for the academic session, but for the schools, the sessions they need to attend 1/3 at a time. 1/3 strength can be attended, just like being done for the employees, the government and private employees. And also the children need to be taught probably through jingles or small video training sessions as to what they need to do at schools and how they need to conduct themselves at gatherings.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of the discussion because I think it's already 12:30.
Yeah. Lastly, Dr. Maulyaraj has also asked COVID positives involved in treating COVID positives. In our hospital, they're treating with hydroxychloroquine and Tamiflu, oseltamivir. So oseltamivir is given for the first 5 days, and hydroxychloroquine is given for as a treatment. I mean, 400 milligrams BD as an initial dose and 400 milligrams for the next 3 days. So azithromycin is not given basically. They will be given multivitamin tablets. So as initially it was predicted that H1N1 influenza is also quite high. The prevalence of H1N1 influenza is also quite high. So they were also given oseltamivir tablets. They are also being given oseltamivir tablets. So any other questions?
Request participants, if they have any questions, they can ask. But I think we had a sufficient discussion. Probably, I think this issue, we have many questions, many opinions also.
Yes,
like what could have been done, what was not done. So that's why we are having a question answer session to increase our understanding. And probably questions may be there, opinions may be there. I think time is one of the factors we have to consider here.
Yes.
Since it's already 12:30, so we need to close
Yes,
this discussion. And if there are any questions, they can separately ask Dr. Subhash, and we can collect questions, make note, and again, there are different modes of discussion nowadays. We can continue with discussions. So before closing, it was an elaborate discussion, as Ila is saying. It was an elaborate and very apt discussion. I too agree with her. I just wanted to add 2 more points before closing, because Dr. Gangadhar will conclude before our formal vote of thanks. This pandemic has, as initially I have said, like exposed our public health system. I am repeating this point again and again, is because public health system, though may not be the panacea for this pandemic, but still it could have reduced the burden, it could have reduced mortality, it could have handled this pandemic much better. So it's high time we should raise our demand or raise our voice to allocate more budget for health field, or to make it more efficient, to build up public health system, which is one of the classic examples, classic reasons, one of the reasons for having a strong public health system. Probably we need to study those countries which had, or those states which had a good public health system. They have been able to fare better than where the system is very chaotic and not very good centralized healthcare systems or public health system. That is one point. And second point I wanted to make is, in last 2 to 3 months, several health personnel have succumbed to this pandemic, working in different hospitals in different countries. On May 12th, we did observe Solidarity Day. And on this occasion also, we need to pay homage to all our healthcare personnel, doctors, nursing staff, many pharmacists or students, interns, who have dedicated themselves with all difficulties Probably I don't. Today I think Jacob has written one very good article in Deccan Herald how the soldiers are being made scapegoats because of lack of facilities, but still they are doing their work. So as you rightly said, hats off to them, and we need to appreciate, respect them. We need to pay homage to all departed colleagues who have laid down their lives in fighting this. That's one point I wanted to make before closing. And I thank Dr. Subhash. It was a good discussion. We could have gone on and on, but since time is short, we have to conclude. And I thank Dr. Maularaj also. Actually, he was he was moderating because of some technical issues. He could not. And I thank Dr. Seema also and Hila. I request Dr. Gangadhar sir to make concluding remarks, and I request Dr. Upendra to propose vote of thanks. If there is any other points for our senior members to make, I request them to make on this occasion. I think some more questions have come.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಾಯ್ತು ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಭಾಷ್ ಬಾಬು. ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಾಯ್ತು. ಬಹಳ ಇಂಪ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಸೆಷನ್. ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಗುಡ್ ಅಂಡ್ many youngsters participated and your lucid explanation was also very good, and it's too light on the problem of pandemic and how we are facing it and what challenge it has thrown to the medical profession as well as the public health sector. It is a challenge to the public health sector, and how we face it and how we have to combat it is the question actually. It is thrown a lot of light on the subject. Thank you, Dr. Subhash Babu. Many senior doctors also participated in our discussion. Dr. Lakshman, Dr. Dharmanand, and our past president, Dr. Bonapur also was there in the discussion. And many youngsters also participated very well. They got many questions and probably they got clarified also some of the questions. And I thank all participants at the same time, all senior doctors also. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that opportunity. As closing remarks, I would just like to add a few words. Actually, this pandemic has made us work as the whole government machinery as one actually. So it was not just from the efforts from the healthcare department. The entire district administration, including the revenue, the police department, the electricity, I mean every other departments have worked together to contain this epidemic, actually pandemic. In that way, this is how a public health response should be. The public health response should not from entirely from a healthcare department. It should be from everyone involved. So in that way, probably we should be able to coordinate better in case of any other problems next time. But ideally, we should not forget these lessons which I've learned from this pandemic, response to this pandemic.
But this pandemic has showed that we can definitely do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sure.
We can definitely do as a society with the pressure of people.
Yes, sir.
We can definitely tackle so many, not only COVID, so many other diseases.
Yes, sir. That is how we need to do that, sir, actually.
That's what we do. Over to Dr. Upendra for proposing vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Honorable MSc members, our most speaker, Dr. Subhash Babu sir, Associate Professor, Department of Community Medicine, NIMS, all the participants, and it's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, Dr. Upendra, on behalf of MSc Karnataka, Fraternity of Medical Service Center, and here together and on my own behalf, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Speaker Dr. Subhash.
Thank you.
Blessing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinion today. And I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Dr. Subhash for his explanation with unanswered questions. And I would like to express our sincere thanks to Sudha Kamath State President, MSc Karnataka, and Dr. Gangadhar sir, Vice President, MSc Karnataka, and Dr. Vasundhara sir, Secretary, State Secretary, MSc Karnataka, and all the organizers and participants of this occasion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I thank Medical Service Center and all the office bearers of the Medical Service Center and all the participants today, especially Vasudendra sir, Gangadhar sir, Kamath madam, Sudha madam, and all the and Dr. Upendra for proposing the vote of thanks, Hema madam. So everyone who have participated and who have asked questions, it is also a learning experience for me because many a times it is important to compile these questions because from important questions arise answers. It is not always the answers which are important, it is the questions which are important for which we need to find the answers. So in that way, it was really an enriching experience even for me. So thank you all for providing this opportunity.
Okay, thanks to technical team, Dr. Hema and Dr. Anita also. They have worked hard, and Dr. Maularaj also. Shivu, we missed Dr. Shiv Kumar, he is on duty today. And one more youngster, Yatindra, and many of our Davangere MSc also. So anyway, it was a good discussion. We can close this discussion and again meet sometime later.
Yes, sir. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Maularaj. Sorry, I forgot to mention you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay, sir. That's okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.